The moment Juliana Cross stepped into the grand hall of the Crimson Assembly, she knew her life had just become infinitely more complicated. The room stretched before her like something from a fever dream, marble columns, rising toward vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of ancient battles, chandeliers dripping with crystals that caught the light of 1,000 candles, and everywhere, the pale, beautiful faces of creatures who shouldn't exist. 200 vampires filled the space, their white hair gleaming like starlight, their skin luminous as fresh snow. They wore suits worth more than her yearly salary, spoke in languages she'd only heard in history documentaries, and regarded her with eyes that ranged from curious gold to predatory crimson. She was the only human in the room, and they all knew it. Juliana clutched her leather portfolio tighter, willing her hands not to shake. She'd been hired as a consultant, a historian specializing in medieval European treaties, to help resolve a dispute over territory boundaries that apparently dated back to the 14th century. The law firm she worked for had no idea their client was an actual vampire court. She'd learned that particular detail approximately 30 seconds after walking through the door.
"Miss Cross."
The voice came from her left, smooth as aged whiskey. A vampire with silvery hair pulled back in an elegant tail approached, his movements too fluid to be entirely human. "I am Lysander, steward to His Majesty. He will see you shortly. Please wait here." Before she could respond, Lysander melted back into the crowd, leaving her standing alone near the entrance like a deer in a clearing full of wolves. The vampires pretended not to stare, but she felt every glance like a physical touch. They murmured to each other in a dozen different languages: French, Italian, what might have been medieval Latin. The sound created a strange symphony, hypnotic and unsettling. Then the room fell silent. Every vampire turned toward the far end of the hall where massive oak doors swung open. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Juliana's breath caught in her throat. He entered like darkness given form. The Vampire King stood at least 6.5 feet tall, his frame broad and powerful beneath a black suit that looked hand-tailored by someone who understood exactly how to make power look elegant. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of purest white, framing a face that was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that would have belonged to a fallen angel. But it was his eyes that made Juliana's heart stutter deep crimson, ancient and knowing, holding centuries of experience and absolutely no mercy. He surveyed the room with the calm certainty of someone who had never questioned his right to rule. When his gaze swept past Juliana, she felt it like lightning down her spine. The king she'd learned his name was Valerian Drakos moved through the crowd, which parted for him like water around a stone. Other vampires bowed their heads in respect, some pressing fists to their chests in what looked like a formal salute. He acknowledged none of them, his attention fixed on the raised dais at the room's center where an ornate throne waited. "We begin," Valerian said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space. The sound was rich and dark, with an accent Juliana couldn't quite place, something older than modern English, shaped by languages long dead. The assembly gathered in a loose semicircle around the dais. Juliana found herself guided forward by Lysander, who materialized at her elbow and steered her to a position near the front. She clutched her portfolio like a shield. The meeting started with formal proceedings, announcements about territories, reports from various vampire houses, disputes over hunting grounds. Juliana tried to focus, to understand the complex political structure unfolding before her, but she kept getting distracted by Valerian himself. He commanded the room with minimal effort, listening to petitions with what seemed like genuine attention, making decisions with swift certainty. When he spoke, everyone listened. When he moved, all eyes tracked him. He was magnetic in a way that had nothing to do with supernatural powers and everything to do with absolute confidence in who and what he was. "The matter of the Eastern Territories," Valerian announced, and suddenly Juliana understood why she was there. A vampire stepped forward, tall, dark-haired instead of white, which marked him as young by their standards. Perhaps only a century or two old. "Your Majesty, House Corvinus maintains that the treaties of 1347 clearly delineate. The treaties of 1347 were written in medieval French and have been mistranslated for centuries." Another vampire interrupted, this one with white hair shot through with silver. "House Mordecai holds the rightful claim." The argument escalated quickly, voices rising, other vampires choosing sides. Juliana watched in fascination as centuries-old grudges bubbled to the surface. These creatures had been alive when those treaties were written, had probably known the people who signed them. Valerian let it continue for exactly 90 seconds before he raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. "Miss Cross." His crimson eyes found her in the crowd. "You have examined the original documents?" Every vampire in the room turned to look at her. Juliana swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet Valerian's gaze. "I have, Your Majesty, and your conclusion?" She'd spent 3 weeks in archives, cross-referencing translations, examining the actual medieval French texts that had somehow found their way to her office. The law firm's senior partner had been very insistent that she be thorough, had paid her triple her normal rate for discretion and speed. Now she understood why. "The translation error occurred in the 16th century, Juliana said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "The original French word was frontière, which in the medieval context meant frontier zone rather than fixed border. The territories were meant to be shared hunting grounds, not divided possessions." Silence. Then murmuring, some vampires looking pleased, others distinctly less so. "Impossible," someone said from the back of the room. "We have maintained those borders for 300 years based on a mistranslation," Juliana interrupted, then immediately regretted it when every eye fixed on her again. But she'd started, so she might as well finish. "I've documented everything. The evolution of the language, the contextual usage in other treaties from the same period, even the specific dialects used by the French courts that issued the original documents." She pulled out her laptop, which looked absurdly modern in this Gothic hall, and projected her findings onto the wall. Charts, photographs of original texts, linguistic analyses. She walked them through her research, pointing out the exact moment the mistranslation had occurred, and how it had been perpetuated through subsequent copies. The vampires listened in rapt silence. These were creatures who valued history, who had lived through what she'd studied. They appreciated thoroughness. When she finished, Valerian studied the projected documents for a long moment. "Your scholarship is impressive, Miss Cross." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Being praised by a vampire king should not feel this good. "House Corvinus and House Mordecai will establish joint governance of the Eastern Territories," Valerian declared. "As was originally intended, we return to the old ways." The representatives of both houses looked like they wanted to argue, but something in Valerian's expression made them bow their heads in acceptance instead. The meeting continued, other matters discussed and resolved. Juliana stayed quiet, trying to process the fact that vampires were real, that she was standing in a room full of them, that they had their own government and laws, and apparently very well-preserved medieval documents. She was so caught up in her thoughts that she almost missed it. "The human should not be here," a voice said from the middle of the assembly. "This is a matter for our kind alone." Juliana's stomach dropped. She turned to see who had spoken, a vampire with features that suggested Eastern European ancestry, his white hair cropped short, his expression disdainful. "Lord Constantin, Miss Cross was invited as an expert consultant," Lysander said smoothly, stepping forward. "She is livestock," Constantin said, and the word hit Juliana like a slap. "Useful perhaps for this one task, but she does not belong among us. She should wait outside until her betters have need of her services. Having her here, allowing her to witness our proceedings as though she were our equal, it is an insult to every vampire in this room." Juliana felt heat flood her face. She wanted to defend herself, wanted to point out that she'd just solved a centuries-old dispute that none of them had managed to resolve, but her throat had closed up. The other vampires were watching, some with sympathy, others with cool agreement. Then Valerian moved. He descended from the dais with terrifying grace, crossing the floor until he stood directly in front of Constantin. The temperature in the room plummeted. Juliana could see her breath misting in the air. "Say that again," Valerian said softly. Constantin's confidence faltered. "Your Majesty, I merely meant, you called my invited guest livestock. You suggested she was beneath notice. You disrespected someone under my protection in my own hall." Valerian's voice remained quiet, conversational even, but power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "Say it again, I want to be certain I heard you correctly." Constantin took a step back. "Your Majesty." I spoke hastily. Valerian turned to face the full assembly, his crimson eyes scanning the crowd. 200 vampires, some of the oldest and most powerful creatures on Earth, and not one of them met his gaze. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Juliana could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the whisper of fabric as vampires shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke, no one moved. The Vampire King stood in the center of the room, his mere presence a challenge and a warning, daring anyone to support Constantin's words. 2 minutes. 3. Juliana realized she was watching something profound, a demonstration of power that had nothing to do with physical strength or supernatural abilities. This was pure dominance, the weight of centuries of rule, the absolute certainty that he would tolerate no disrespect to those he chose to protect. 5 minutes. The silence became oppressive, heavy with unspoken tension. Some of the vampires had closed their eyes, unwilling to even risk accidental eye contact. Others stared at the floor as though they'd found something fascinating in the marble patterns. 7 minutes. Constantin looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Sweat beaded on his pale forehead, something Juliana hadn't known vampires could do. 10 minutes. Finally, Valerian spoke. Miss Cross is here at my invitation. She is under my protection. She has provided service to this court that none of you managed in 3 centuries of bickering. She will be treated with the respect due to an honored consultant. He paused, letting each word land like a hammer. Anyone who disagrees may challenge me directly now. No one moved. Valerian turned back to Constantin. You will apologize to Miss Cross, on your knees. Constantin's face went even paler, which Juliana wouldn't have thought possible. But he dropped to his knees without hesitation, his head bowed. Miss Cross, I apologize. My words were inappropriate and disrespectful. Please forgive my discourtesy. Juliana's mind reeled. A vampire, a creature that could probably rip her apart without breaking a sweat, was kneeling before her, apologizing. Because Valerian had commanded it. Her voice came out scratchy. She cleared her throat. I accept your apology, Lord Constantin. Constantin rose, his expression carefully neutral, and melted back into the crowd. Valerian returned to the dais. We are finished for tonight. The assembly is dismissed. The vampires filed out quickly, clearly eager to escape the tension. Juliana stood frozen, her mind trying to process what had just happened. That silence, 10 minutes of absolute, terrified silence because a vampire king had stared down his entire court to defend her honor. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was possibly the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed, and that thought made her feel slightly unhinged. Miss Cross. Valerian's voice drew her attention. The room had emptied except for her, him, and Lysander lurking somewhere in the shadows. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Valerian led her through a side door into a corridor that looked like it belonged in a European castle, stone walls hung with tapestries, torches in wrought iron sconces providing flickering light. Their footsteps echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I apologize for Constantin, Valerian said. He is old and set in his ways. He forgets that times change. How old? Juliana asked, then wondered if that was rude. 600 years, give or take a decade. Valerian glanced at her and she thought she saw amusement flicker in his crimson eyes. Young enough to know better, old enough to have developed unfortunate prejudices. They walked in silence for a moment. Juliana tried to organize her thoughts, to ask one of the 1,000 questions crowding her mind, but what came out was, thank you for defending me. You are under my protection. No one insults what is mine. The possessiveness in his tone should have bothered her. Instead, it sent a thrill down her spine that she absolutely did not want to examine. I didn't know vampires were real until tonight, she admitted. The law firm just said it was a very private client who valued discretion. We have always been real. We simply prefer to remain unseen. Valerian pushed open another door, revealing a library that made Juliana's heart sing. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, some looking ancient enough to crumble at a touch. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, casting warm light over leather furniture and thick carpets. Humans see what they wish to see. It takes very little effort to remain myth. But you trusted me with the truth. You would have learned it eventually. Your research was too valuable to discard out of fear that you might discover our nature. He gestured to a chair near the fire. Sit, we have much to discuss. Juliana sat, her portfolio balanced on her lap like armor. Valerian took the chair across from her, moving with that unnatural grace that marked him as other. In the firelight he looked even more striking, the flames painting shadows across his elegant features, his white hair gleaming like silver. I have more work for you if you are willing, Valerian said. We have centuries of documents that require proper translation and interpretation. Treaties, accords, territorial agreements. Many have been corrupted by time and careless transcription. I would pay you well. How well? The question popped out before Juliana could stop it. She flushed. Sorry, that was practical. I appreciate directness. The corner of Valerian's mouth quirked up, not quite a smile, but close. Name your price, Miss Cross. I assure you, money is not an object for someone who has had 800 years to accumulate wealth. 800 years. Juliana tried to wrap her mind around it. This man, this vampire, had been alive since the 13th century. He'd witnessed the Black Death, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution. He'd probably met people she'd only read about in history books. I'll need to think about it, she said carefully. This is a lot to process. Of course, take the time you require. Valerian leaned back in his chair, studying her with unsettling intensity. You are afraid of me. It wasn't a question, but Juliana answered anyway. Shouldn't I be? You're a vampire, a king of vampires. You could kill me without breaking a sweat. I could, he agreed. But I will not. You are far too valuable alive and working for me than dead on my floor. The practicality of the statement made Juliana laugh despite herself. That's oddly reassuring. I find honesty preferable to false comfort. Valerian tilted his head, a curiously predatory gesture. You have questions? Ask them. Juliana had about 1,000,000 questions, but she started with the most obvious. Why do you all look the same? White hair, pale skin, is that genetic? The transformation removes pigment. All vampires eventually take on the same coloring, regardless of how we appeared in life. It marks us as separate from humanity, a visible sign of what we have become. He ran a hand through his white hair absently. Some find it beautiful, others find it monstrous. I have long since stopped caring which. I think it's beautiful, Juliana said, then immediately wanted to bite her tongue. Professional distance, she reminded herself. He's a client, a vampire client, but still a client. Something heated flickered in Valerian's eyes. Do you? The air between them felt suddenly charged. Juliana struggled for something to say that would diffuse the tension, came up empty, and settled for asking another question. The sunlight thing, is that real? Unfortunately, yes. Sunlight is lethal to our kind. We have built our world accordingly: underground halls, windowless chambers, careful scheduling of activities. It is a limitation we have learned to work around, but it remains a weakness. He gestured around the library. This entire complex exists beneath the city. Humans walk overhead, unaware that an entire civilization thrives in the darkness below their feet. Juliana thought about the implications. How many vampires are there? Fewer than you might think. We are not prolific. Transformation is difficult, dangerous, and highly regulated. Only a king or queen may authorize new vampires. There are perhaps 10,000 of us worldwide, and you rule all of them? I rule those in the Western Territories, Europe, the Americas. There are other kings and queens who govern their own regions. We maintain alliances, trade agreements, territorial accords. Not so different from human governments in many ways. Valerian's expression turned wry. We simply have longer memories and hold grudges for centuries rather than years. They talked for hours. Valerian answered every question with a patience that surprised her, explaining vampire politics and history, the complex social hierarchies, the rules that governed their kind. He told her about the blood laws, how vampires could feed without killing, how they maintained agreements with select humans who donated in exchange for money or protection, or sometimes just the thrill of it. We are not monsters, Valerian said at one point, his crimson eyes serious. Or rather, we choose not to be. Every vampire must feed, but we need not kill. The laws I enforce are strict. Those who murder humans face execution. Those who expose our kind to uncontrolled discovery face execution. We survive by remaining hidden and by maintaining control. That's why you came down so hard on Constantin, Juliana realized. It wasn't just about defending me, it was about maintaining order. It was both. Valerian held her gaze. I defend what is mine, Juliana Cross, and I will not tolerate chaos in my court. Constantin needed to understand that my protection is absolute, and that challenging it carries consequences. The use of her first name sent another thrill through her. When had this stopped feeling like a business meeting and started feeling like something else? I should go, Juliana said, though she made no move to stand. It's late. Early. Whatever, Lysander will escort you home, and he will provide you with contact information should you decide to accept my offer of employment. Valerian rose, extending a hand to help her up. Juliana took it without thinking. His skin was cool to the touch, his grip firm but careful, as though he knew exactly how much strength to use without hurting her. He pulled her to her feet with effortless ease, and suddenly they were standing very close together. Thank you, Juliana said softly, for everything tonight, for defending me, for answering my questions, for treating you as you deserve to be treated. Valerian's free hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. That requires no thanks, Juliana. She should step back, should put professional distance between them, should remember that he was a vampire king and she was a human historian, and this was a terrible idea on approximately 17 different levels. Instead, she stood frozen, caught in the gravity of his presence. Valerian's expression softened, something almost tender crossing his features. You should rest. We will speak again soon. He released her hand and stepped back, breaking the spell. Juliana nodded, not trusting her voice, and let Lysander, who materialized from the shadows like a ghost, lead her out of the library through the winding corridors, and eventually into an elevator that rose to street level. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp and real. Lysander guided her to a black car with tinted windows, held the door open, and gave the driver her address without her having to say a word. His Majesty looks forward to working with you, Miss Cross, Lysander said before closing the door. Juliana sat in the back of the luxury car, her mind spinning. As the city lights blurred past the windows, vampires were real. She'd just spent hours talking with a vampire king who had defended her honor and looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. She was absolutely, completely, thoroughly in over her head. And the worst part? She couldn't wait to see him again. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of research and late-night meetings. Juliana quit her job at the law firm. They were surprisingly understanding when she cited a private contract with a very wealthy client and devoted herself full-time to working for Valerian's court. The pay was absurd, triple what she'd been making, deposited into her account with clockwork regularity. But it wasn't about the money. Not really. She spent her days in archives and libraries, her evenings in the underground halls of the vampire court, translating documents and explaining historical contexts. Valerian was always there, listening intently, asking insightful questions, occasionally challenging her interpretations with knowledge drawn from actual lived experience. "You are wrong about the intent of this clause," he said one night, tapping a medieval marriage contract she'd been translating. "It seems to suggest a transfer of property, but in practice, such contracts were used to establish blood bonds between houses. The daughter was not sold, she was transformed and joined her husband's house as a vampire, creating an eternal alliance." Juliana stared at the faded text with new eyes. "So vampire marriages are literally forever, until one or both parties are destroyed, yes. We do not enter such bonds lightly." Valerian's expression turned distant. "I have never married. 800 years, and I have never found someone worth eternity." There was a weight to those words that made Juliana's chest tight. She changed the subject quickly, focusing back on the documents. But the tension between them grew with each passing meeting. The way Valerian watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. The care he took never to touch her unnecessarily, as though he didn't trust himself to maintain control. The protective way he positioned himself between her and any other vampire who entered the library during their work sessions. Other vampires had started to treat her differently too. Word had spread about Constantine's public humiliation. Now when Juliana walked through the halls, vampires nodded respectfully, stepped aside to let her pass, addressed her as Miss Cross with genuine courtesy. She was under the king's protection, and everyone knew it meant something significant. "You have made quite an impression," Lysander commented one evening as he escorted her to the library. "The court is curious about you." "Curious how?" Juliana asked warily. "His Majesty has not shown such interest in anyone in over a century. There is speculation about his intentions." Heat flooded Juliana's face. "We're working together, that's all." Lysander gave her a look that suggested he didn't believe that for a second but was too polite to say so. "Of course, Miss Cross." That night, Juliana arrived at the library to find it empty. No Valerian waiting in his usual chair, no documents spread across the desk, no fire crackling in the hearth. Just darkness and silence. She was about to leave when she heard it music, faint and beautiful, coming from somewhere deeper in the complex. Without thinking, she followed the sound. The music led her through corridors she hadn't explored before, down a spiral staircase carved from black stone, to a door that stood slightly ajar. Soft light spilled through the gap. Juliana pushed it open. The room beyond took her breath away. It was a ballroom, vast and elegant, with marble floors polished to a mirror shine and columns carved with intricate designs. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals catching and fracturing light. And in the center of it all, Valerian stood alone, his white hair loose around his shoulders, his expression distant. The music came from speakers hidden somewhere in the walls, something classical, Vivaldi maybe, or Handel, something old and achingly beautiful. "I did not mean to disturb your work," Valerian said without turning around. "Lysander should have told you I would be unavailable tonight." "He didn't. I followed the music." Juliana stepped into the room. "What is this place?" "A relic of an earlier age. We used to hold gatherings here, balls, celebrations. We danced and pretended to be civilized creatures rather than predators in evening wear." Valerian finally turned to face her, and the loneliness in his expression hit her like a physical blow. "I come here sometimes to remember what it felt like to be part of something beautiful rather than simply powerful." Juliana crossed the ballroom, her footsteps echoing off the marble. "Do you miss it? The gatherings?" "I miss the simplicity, the certainty. We knew who we were, what we were, and we made no apologies for it. Now we hide in the dark and pretend humanity has not eclipsed us in every way that matters." He tilted his head, studying her. "Do you know what the worst part of immortality is, Juliana?" She shook her head. "Watching the world change while you remain frozen. I was born in an age of castles and kingdoms, of honor and bloodlines. Now we have corporations and democracies and social media. The world I knew is gone, and I am simply a ghost haunting the ruins of my own past." The pain in his voice made Juliana's heart ache. She reached out before she could stop herself, taking his hand. His skin was cool, but his fingers curled around hers with desperate strength. "You're not a ghost," she said firmly. "You're alive. Maybe not the way I'm alive, but you're here, you're real, and you still matter. The vampires in your court look to you for leadership. You maintain order, you protect your people, you preserve history. That's not nothing, Valerian." He stared at their joined hands. "You use my name. Is that not allowed? It is unexpected. Most call me your majesty or sire or some other title that maintains distance." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the gesture absent and intimate. "I find I like hearing my name from your lips." The air between them charged with electricity. The music swelled, strings and harpsichord weaving together in intricate harmony. "Dance with me," Valerian said suddenly. "I don't know how to dance like this, whatever this is." Juliana gestured vaguely at the ballroom. "I can barely manage a two-step. I will teach you." He pulled her closer, positioning her hands properly, one on his shoulder, the other clasped in his. His free hand settled on her waist, firm and possessive. "Follow my lead." They began to move, Valerian guiding her through the steps with patience and precision. Juliana stumbled at first, hyper-aware of every point of contact between them, but gradually she found the rhythm. They swept across the marble floor, the music wrapping around them like silk. "You learn quickly," Valerian murmured. "I have a good teacher." They danced through 3 songs, neither speaking, lost in the moment. Juliana let herself forget that he was a vampire king, and she was a human historian. Let herself simply be a woman dancing with a man who looked at her like she was the only real thing in his eternal existence. When the 3rd song ended, they stood still in the center of the ballroom, neither willing to let go. "Juliana," Valerian said, his voice rough with some emotion she couldn't name. "I should not, we should not." "Why?" She looked up at him, at his crimson eyes that held centuries of experience and loss and carefully guarded hope. "Because you're a vampire and I'm human? Because you're a king and I'm a consultant? Because this is complicated and dangerous and probably a terrible idea?" All of those reasons and more. But his hand tightened on her waist. "You deserve someone who can give you a normal life. Someone who can take you to dinner in daylight, who ages alongside you, who does not carry the weight of 8 centuries of blood and death." "What if I don't want normal?" Juliana's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What if I want this, whatever this is, even knowing it's complicated?" "You do not know what you are asking. Then tell me. Explain it to me." She refused to look away, refused to let him retreat behind walls of duty and self-denial. "I'm not afraid of you, Valerian. I should be maybe, but I'm not. I'm afraid of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Valerian closed his eyes, his expression anguished. "If I claim you, truly claim you, it will change everything. The court will see you as mine. Other vampires will view you as under my permanent protection, but also as a potential weakness to exploit. You will be drawn into politics and dangers that most humans never dream of." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with devastating honesty. "I am possessive by nature. If I allow myself to have you, I will never let you go. Not willingly, not for anything short of your death or mine." "That sounds like a warning." "It is. You should heed it and run while you still can." Juliana reached up, cupping his face with her free hand. His skin was cool beneath her palms, smooth and perfect. "I'm not running, Juliana." She kissed him. It was impulsive and probably stupid, but she'd been wanting to do it for weeks, and she was tired of fighting the pull between them. His lips were cool and soft, and for a heartbeat he remained perfectly still, frozen in shock. Then he kissed her back, and the world caught fire. Valerian made a sound low in his throat, possessive and hungry, and pulled her flush against him. His arms wrapped around her like iron bands, holding her so close she could feel the dead stillness of his chest where a heartbeat should be. He kissed her like a man starving, like she was air and water and everything necessary for survival. Juliana's hands tangled in his white hair, pulling him down to her level. She'd never been kissed like this, with such focused intensity, such desperate need. He was careful despite his hunger, controlling his strength so he didn't hurt her, but she could feel the power coiled in his frame, the predator held in check by pure will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, or at least she was breathing hard. Valerian didn't technically need to breathe. She felt dizzy and electrified and absolutely certain she'd just made a decision that would change her entire life. "This is madness," Valerian said. But he didn't let her go. "Probably," Juliana agreed. "I don't care." He laughed, the sound startled and genuine. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both? I suppose you can." He pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes falling closed. I am not a good man, Juliana. I have lived too long and done too many terrible things. I will disappoint you. Everyone disappoints everyone eventually. At least you're being honest about it up front. She pulled back enough to meet his gaze. I'm not expecting you to be perfect, Valerian. I'm expecting you to be real, that's all. Something in his expression cracked open, vulnerability showing through the centuries of careful control. I do not deserve you. Good thing I'm not asking for what you deserve. I'm asking for what I want, and what do you want? This you. Whatever we can have. For however long we can have it. Valerian studied her for a long moment, his crimson eyes searching her face for any hint of doubt or fear. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. Then you shall have it, have me, for as long as you wish. He kissed her again, slower this time, tender and claiming all at once. Juliana melted into him, and knew she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. She didn't regret it for a second. The court reacted to their relationship with a mixture of fascination and concern. Valerian made no secret of his claim on Juliana, keeping her close during assemblies, ensuring she sat at his right hand during formal proceedings, making it abundantly clear that she was under his personal protection. Most vampires accepted it with grace. A few looked concerned but kept their opinions to themselves. Constantin wisely had made himself scarce, but there were whispers. Juliana heard them when she walked through the hall's speculation about what Valerian intended, whether he planned to transform her, how long a human could survive in their world. They are worried I will distract their king, Valerian explained one night as they reviewed documents in the library. He sat in his usual chair, Juliana curled against him, her head resting on his shoulder. They fear I will become careless or that you will manipulate me for human ends. Will you become careless? I have existed for 8 centuries. I think I can manage to rule effectively while also caring for one very stubborn human. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. But I understand their concern. Kings are not meant to have weaknesses. Affection is a liability in our world. Is that what I am? A weakness? You are my Achilles heel, Valerian said quietly. If anyone wished to hurt me, truly hurt me, they need only threaten you. Every vampire in this court knows it. The thought sent a chill down Juliana's spine. Should I be worried? Not while I draw breath. I will protect you with everything I am, everything I have. But you should be aware of the danger. His arms tightened around her. I can offer you safety within these walls, within the spaces I control. But the world is large, and there are those who would use you against me if given the chance. Juliana turned to look at him. Other vampire kings, perhaps, or enemies within my own court who believe I have grown too attached to a human, or human hunters who have learned of our existence and seek to exploit any perceived weakness. He cupped her face gently. I tell you this not to frighten you, but to ensure you understand the reality of this choice. Being mine comes with protection but also with risk. I understand. And she did truly. This wasn't a fairy tale. There would be consequences to loving a vampire king, dangers she couldn't fully anticipate. But she'd made her choice, and she meant to stand by it. I'm not going anywhere, Valerian, stubborn woman. You like that about me. I do, he admitted with a small smile. I like everything about you. It is deeply inconvenient. They settled back into comfortable silence, the fire crackling, surrounded by centuries of accumulated knowledge. Juliana had never felt safer or more at risk in her entire life. The attack came 3 months into their relationship. Juliana had been working late in the archives, a section of the underground complex dedicated to storing the oldest and most fragile documents. She'd gotten absorbed in translating a particularly tricky 12th century land agreement and lost track of time. When she finally emerged, stretching her stiff shoulders, she realized the hallways were unusually quiet. The guards who normally patrolled these corridors were absent. No vampires moved through the shadows. Even the torches seemed to burn less brightly. Her instincts screamed danger. Juliana turned to head back to the archives, planning to lock herself in and call for help, but a figure materialized from the shadows to block her path. Not Valerian, not Lysander. A vampire she didn't recognize, white-haired like all of them, but with eyes that gleamed gold instead of red, wearing modern tactical clothing instead of the elegant suits favored by the court. Juliana Cross, the vampire said, his accent vaguely European. You are coming with us. Use. Juliana's voice came out steadier than she felt. 3 more vampires emerged from the shadows, surrounding her. All strangers, all armed with weapons that looked designed to kill other vampires, stakes, silver blades, something that might have been a UV flashlight. We mean you no permanent harm, the first vampire said. You are simply leverage. Valerian has something we want. Once he delivers it, you will be returned unharmed. And if he doesn't deliver? Juliana asked, already knowing the answer. Then you become unnecessary. They moved fast, faster than she could track. One moment she was standing in the corridor, the next she was being half carried, half dragged through passages she didn't recognize. She tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth, cutting off sound. They emerged into what looked like an old subway tunnel, long abandoned, lit by battery-powered lamps. A car waited, engine running. They shoved her inside, and the world blurred into motion. Juliana's mind raced. They'd taken her from the heart of Valerian's territory, from under his protection. That meant either they were incredibly bold or they had inside help. The missing guards suddenly made sense. Someone had ensured her path would be unprotected. The car stopped in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Her captors pulled her out, none too gently, and bound her hands with zip ties. They deposited her in a room with concrete walls and a single barred window high up near the ceiling. Through it she could see the night sky beginning to lighten toward dawn.
Comfortable?
The lead vampire asked mockingly. Good, we will contact your king shortly. Until then, try not to cause trouble. They left, locking the door behind them. Juliana immediately began working on the zip ties, twisting her wrists, looking for any weakness. Her mind spun through possibilities. Valerian would come for her, she had no doubt about that. But what would these vampires demand in exchange? What did they want badly enough to risk the wrath of a vampire king? Hours passed. The light through the window grew stronger, then began to fade again as evening approached. No one came to check on her. She could hear voices occasionally, muffled conversation in languages she didn't understand. Then, suddenly, silence, the kind of silence that came right before a storm. The door to her room exploded inward, torn off its hinges with casual violence. Valerian stood in the doorway, his white hair wild around his shoulders, his crimson eyes blazing with fury. He wore all black and blood spattered his clothes, not his own, she noted with distant clarity. Juliana, her name came out ragged with relief. He crossed the room in 2 strides, breaking her bonds with his bare hands. Are you hurt? No, shaken but not hurt. She looked past him to where bodies lay in the hallway, vampires torn apart with brutal efficiency. How did you find me? I turned this city inside out. Valerian cupped her face, his touch gentle despite the violence he'd just committed. When I discovered you missing, when I realized someone had dared to take what is mine. His voice broke. I have never known such fear. Juliana threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. He held her like she was infinitely precious, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. I'm okay, she murmured. I promise, I'm okay. They took you from my own halls, from under my protection. Fury vibrated through every word. That is an act of war. Who were they? Mercenaries, hired by House Corvinus. Apparently they did not appreciate being forced to share the eastern territories. Valerian pulled back enough to meet her eyes. They thought to use you as leverage to force me to reverse my ruling. They failed to understand that threatening you would only ensure their destruction. The vampires of the hallway are dead. All of them. As is Lord Corvinus and every member of his house who supported this action. Valerian's expression was cold, merciless. I made it clear what would happen to anyone who threatened you. They chose not to listen. Now they serve as an example to others who might consider similar foolishness. Juliana should have been horrified. He'd just wiped out an entire vampire house, had killed what must have been dozens of beings. But all she felt was relief and a fierce, possessive satisfaction that he'd come for her, that he'd burned down anyone who tried to keep them apart. Take me home, she said. Valerian lifted her into his arms without a word and carried her out of the warehouse, through corridors lined with bodies, past vampires who knelt as he passed reinforcements from his court. She realized who had helped him mount this rescue. The night air hit her face, cold and clean. Valerian set her gently in the back of a car that had appeared as if summoned, slid in beside her and pulled her against him. She curled into his embrace, letting the adrenaline drain from her system. I will not let this happen again, Valerian said quietly. From now on, you will have guards whenever you are in the complex. The best warriors in my court, sworn to protect you with their lives. I don't need, yes, you do, and I need the peace of mind that comes from knowing you are protected. His hand stroked through her hair, soothing. Please, Juliana, allow me this. She nodded against his chest. Okay, they rode in silence back to the underground complex. Word of what had happened had already spread. Vampires lined the corridors as they passed, all kneeling, all pressing fists to their chests in salute. A show of loyalty to their king and acknowledgement of his mate. Because that's what she was, Juliana realized. In vampire terms, in the ways that mattered to their kind, she was Valerian's mate. The being he'd chosen above all others, the one he'd go to war to protect. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt right. Valerian brought her to his private chambers, rooms she'd never seen before, decorated in dark woods and rich fabrics. somehow managing to be both luxurious and austere. He set her down on a massive bed, then knelt before her, his hands resting lightly on her knees. "Forgive me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I failed to protect you. I allowed them to take you from under my own roof. If anything had happened to you..." Juliana placed her fingers over his lips, silencing him. "You found me. You saved me. That's what matters. I killed for you tonight. Dozens of vampires eliminated without mercy or hesitation." His eyes searched hers. "Does that frighten you?" "No." And it didn't, which probably said something about how far she'd come from the woman who'd stumbled into that first assembly. "They tried to use me as a weapon against you. They made a choice. They faced the consequences." Valerian surged up, kissing her with desperate intensity. Juliana kissed him back, pouring all her fear and relief and love, yes, love, she could admit it now, into the contact. His hands shook as they framed her face. This ancient, powerful being undone by emotion. "I love you," Juliana said when they broke apart. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I love you, Valerian." He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I have loved you since the night you stood before my court and lectured 200 vampires on medieval French linguistics with absolute confidence. I have loved you through every translation, every argument, every moment you refused to be intimidated by creatures that should terrify you. I love your courage and your stubbornness and your brilliant mind. I love everything you are, Juliana Cross, and I will love you until this world crumbles to dust." "That's very dramatic," Juliana said, smiling through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I am 800 years old. I am allowed to be dramatic." He kissed her tears away with infinite gentleness. "Stay with me. Not just tonight, but always. Let me love you properly. I'm human, Valerian. I age, I die. You'll outlive me by centuries. Then we will have whatever time we are granted, and I will treasure every moment." His thumb traced her jawline. "Unless if you wished it, there is another option." Juliana's breath caught. "Transformation, it is not a decision to make lightly. You would lose the sun forever, would need to feed on blood, would watch the human world change while you remained frozen in time. But you would have eternity. We would have eternity." His expression turned vulnerable. "I do not ask this of you. I will love you whether you remain human or choose to become one of us. But the option exists should you want it. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need, years, decades if necessary. I am patient, and I am yours regardless of your choice." They lay together in his bed, Juliana wrapped in Valerian's arms, listening to him breathe even though he didn't need to, the habit maintained from human life. She thought about the future, about choices and consequences, about loving someone so completely that species differences seemed irrelevant. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew she wanted this, wanted him, wanted whatever life they could build together. Everything else would sort itself out in time. The months that followed were the happiest of Juliana's life. She moved into Valerian's chambers, integrated herself fully into vampire court life, continued her work translating and preserving historical documents. The court accepted her presence, some vampires even becoming friendly, treating her as Valerian's acknowledged mate deserved to be treated. She had guards now, 2 warriors named Bastian and Nikolai, who took their duties seriously, but were also surprisingly good company. They accompanied her everywhere, silent shadows who ensured no one would get close enough to threaten her again. Valerian remained attentive and protective, but he also gave her space to be herself, to maintain her independence. They established routines, working together in the library several nights a week, attending court functions as a united front, stealing private moments whenever possible. He taught her about vampire culture, introduced her to ancient customs and modern adaptations. She taught him about contemporary human society, explaining social media and streaming services and why people were obsessed with true crime podcasts. "Your world is very strange," Valerian commented one night as Juliana tried to explain viral videos. Says the Vampire King. "I am traditional, not strange." "There is a difference." They laughed together, and Juliana marveled at how natural this felt, how right. But the question of transformation hung between them, unspoken but present. Valerian never pushed, never brought it up unless she did first. But she saw him watching her sometimes with an expression that was part longing, part dread, clearly torn between wanting forever with her and fearing what transformation might cost her. Juliana did her research. She interviewed vampires who'd been transformed, asked about the process, the changes, the adjustments. Most spoke of it as a rebirth, painful and difficult, but ultimately worthwhile. A few expressed regret for what they'd lost, but acknowledged that life as a vampire had its own rewards. Lysander was particularly helpful, answering her questions with characteristic patience. "The transformation takes 3 days, he explained. 3 days of agony as your body dies and rebuilds itself. His Majesty would need to drain you nearly to death, then feed you his own blood. It forces the change, rewrites everything you are on a fundamental level. And after? You would be vulnerable for several months while your new abilities developed. You would need to learn to feed without killing, to control the bloodlust that comes with being a young vampire. You would need to adjust to a world without sunlight. Lysander studied her carefully. But you would also be strong, fast, nearly immortal. You would have centuries to live and learn, and you would have forever with Valerian, if that is what you truly want. It is, Juliana said without hesitation. Then you should tell him. That night, Juliana found Valerian in the ballroom where they'd first kissed, standing alone among the columns and chandeliers. He looked ethereal in the dim light, like something from a dream. I've made my decision, she said. Her voice echoing off the marble. Valerian turned, his expression carefully neutral. Have you? I want transformation. I want eternity with you. I want forever. He closed his eyes, pain and relief warring on his face. Are you certain? Once done, it cannot be undone. You would lose your humanity, your mortality. You would become something other. I would become like you, and that doesn't scare me. Juliana crossed the ballroom to stand before him. I've thought about this from every angle. I've weighed the costs and the benefits. I know what I'm giving up and I know what I'm gaining. I want this, Valerian. I want you for as long as forever lasts. The transformation is agonizing. I would have to watch you suffer, unable to help beyond seeing it through. His voice broke. It will be the hardest thing I have ever done, but you'll do it? For us? Valerian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I would do anything for you. Transform you, walk into the sun, burn down the world if you asked it of me. You are everything, Juliana, everything. They chose a date 3 weeks out, time for Juliana to settle her human affairs, to say goodbyes to family and friends without revealing the truth. She told her parents she was taking a long-term contract overseas, would be out of contact for a while. They were sad but understanding. She'd always been independent, always chased her passions wherever they led. The court prepared for the transformation with ceremonial seriousness. This would be the first new vampire Valerian had authorized in over 50 years, and it carried political weight. He was creating a mate, declaring to all of vampire society that Juliana was his chosen partner for eternity. The night arrived too quickly and not fast enough. Juliana stood in Valerian's chambers, dressed in simple clothes that would be easy to remove, her heart pounding with anticipation and nerves. Last chance to change your mind, Valerian said, though his hands shook as he reached for her. Not changing my mind. Juliana stepped into his embrace. I love you. Let's do this. He kissed her with desperate tenderness, then guided her to the bed. I will make this as gentle as I can, but it will hurt. The bite, the draining, the transformation itself. You will feel like you are dying because you will be dying, but I will be here through all of it. I promise. I trust you. Valerian's fangs extended, sharp and deadly. Juliana had seen them before, but never like this. Never with the knowledge that they were about to pierce her skin. He pressed his lips to her throat, right over her pulse, and she felt his breath against her skin. I love you, he whispered. Remember that when the pain comes, I love you more than existence itself. Then he bit down. The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming, fire racing through her veins. But beneath it was something else, intimacy, connection, the sense of Valerian drinking her very essence. She clutched at him, distantly aware that she was making sounds, gasping or crying or both. He drank deep, controlled but thorough, taking her blood until the world started to gray at the edges. Just when Juliana thought she might pass out, he pulled back, his lips stained red, his eyes wild with hunger and self-control. Now, he said, biting his own wrist until blood welled. Drink! Juliana latched onto his wrist, drinking the cold, metallic-tasting blood that flowed from the wound. It was nothing like human blood, thicker, richer, laced with power that made her skin prickle. That's enough, Valerian said after several swallows, pulling his wrist away. The wound sealed instantly, vampire healing already at work. Now we wait. The transformation hit like a freight train. One moment Juliana was lying in Valerian's arms. The next she was convulsing with agony as her body began to die and rebuild itself. Every cell screamed, every nerve ending caught fire. She was vaguely aware of Valerian holding her, murmuring words of comfort and love, but the pain drowned out everything else. It felt like dying, it felt like being born, it felt like being torn apart and stitched back together with threads of pure agony. Time lost meaning. Hours blurred into days. The pain came in waves, receding just long enough for her to catch her breath before slamming back with renewed intensity. Through it all, Valerian stayed with her. He held her when she thrashed, stroked her hair when she wept, whispered promises of forever when she begged for it to stop. He never left, never faltered, his presence the only constant in a world of suffering. Finally, blessedly, the pain began to fade. Juliana surfaced from the agony like a drowning person breaking through water, gasping and desperate. Her senses exploded with new information. She could hear heartbeats in distant rooms, smell blood and fear and life, see in perfect clarity despite the dim lighting.
Juliana?
Valerian's voice, rich with concern and hope. She opened her eyes, and the world looked different. Sharper, clearer, painted in shades she'd never known existed. And Valerian, he looked the same but more. Every detail of his face crisp and perfect, his scent intoxicating, his presence magnetic. "I can see," she whispered. "I can hear everything, feel everything. The transformation is complete. You are vampire now, my love. You are immortal." Valerian helped her sit up, supporting her when she swayed. "How do you feel?" "Hungry." The word came out almost a growl. Juliana's throat burned with need, with a thirst that demanded satisfaction. "Valerian, I'm so hungry." "I know, I have prepared for this." He reached for a crystal decanter on the bedside table, filled with what looked like wine but smelled infinitely more appealing. Blood, she realized. Human blood, probably donated by one of the humans who had agreements with the court. "Drink slowly, your body must adjust." Juliana drank, and it was like nothing she'd ever experienced. The blood sang through her, satisfying the burning thirst, filling her with strength and power. She felt alive in a way she never had as a human. Every sense heightened, every ability enhanced. When she'd finished, she looked at Valerian with new eyes. She could see the love in his expression, the relief, the joy. But she could also see the vampire beneath the predator, the king, the ancient being who had chosen her above all others. "I'm like you now," she said, wonder coloring her voice. "You are." Valerian cupped her face, his touch reverent. "You are beautiful and powerful and mine for eternity. Welcome to forever, Juliana." She kissed him, tasting blood on both their lips, feeling the connection between them settle into something permanent and unbreakable. She was vampire now, immortal, bound to him by choice and transformation and love. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "And I love you, for always." The court celebrated her transformation with a formal ceremony. Juliana stood before the assembly, now seeing them as equals rather than as other. She wore a gown of midnight blue that Valerian had commissioned, her white hair transformed like the rest of her, styled in an elaborate arrangement that took 2 servants to achieve. Valerian presented her to the court as his mate, his voice ringing with pride and possession. "Juliana of House Drakos, transformed by my hand, bound to me for eternity. She is my partner, my equal, and under my absolute protection. Any who honor me will honor her. Any who threaten her will face my wrath." The vampires knelt, 200 beings acknowledging her new status. Juliana felt the weight of their recognition, the responsibility that came with being the mate of a vampire king. But she also felt Valerian's hand in hers, steady and sure, and knew she could handle whatever came next. The months that followed were an education in vampire life. Juliana learned to control her new strength, practiced feeding without killing, adjusted to a world without sunlight. It was difficult at times, frustrating when her new instincts warred with her human memories. But Valerian was patient, guiding her through each challenge, celebrating every victory. They ruled together, Valerian making it clear that her opinions carried weight in court decisions, that she was not simply a decorative mate but a partner in governance. Juliana discovered she had a talent for vampire politics, for navigating the complex web of alliances and grudges that defined their society. She mediated disputes, suggested compromises, used her historical knowledge to provide context for contemporary problems. The court respected her, and more than that, they liked her. She was fair but firm, compassionate but not weak. She brought a fresh perspective to centuries-old problems, and Valerian valued her input above almost anyone else's. They made a formidable team. One night, about a year after her transformation, Juliana stood with Valerian on a balcony overlooking the underground complex. The hall stretched below them, lit by torches and filled with vampires going about their eternal lives. "Do you ever regret it?" Valerian asked quietly. "Giving up the sun, your human life, the normal future you could have had?" Juliana turned to him, taking in his beautiful, beloved face. "Not for a second. This is where I belong. With you in this world we've built together." She laced her fingers through his. "You're my forever, Valerian. I chose that, and I'd choose it again 1,000 times over." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you beyond measure, beyond reason, beyond the capacity of language to express. I know, I feel the same way." She rested her head on his shoulder, content and complete. "We're going to have an amazing eternity together." "Yes," Valerian agreed, his arms tightening around her. "Yes, we are." Years passed, then decades. Juliana and Valerian ruled their court with wisdom and strength, navigating political challenges and external threats as a united force. They traveled the world, exploring vampire communities across continents, building alliances, strengthening their position. They loved with the passion of newlyweds and the depth of old souls who had found their perfect match. The connection between them only grew stronger with time, forged in trust and tested by challenges, emerging unbreakable. Juliana never regretted her choice. She missed the sun sometimes, missed certain aspects of human life, but the trade-off was worth it. She had forever with the man she loved, had purpose and power, and a place where she belonged. The court prospered under their joint rule. Other vampire kings and queens regarded them with respect, sometimes envy, seeing what a true partnership could accomplish. They became an example, proof that vampire and human could bridge the gap, that love could transcend species. On their 50th anniversary of Juliana's transformation, Valerian presented her with a gift, a carefully restored medieval manuscript, the very first document she'd translated for him. "Where we began," he said, watching her examine the ancient pages with reverent care. "Where we began," Juliana agreed, smiling at the memory of that first night when she'd walked into an assembly of vampires and had no idea her entire life was about to change. "I was so nervous that night, so completely out of my depth. And yet you stood before 200 predators and lectured us on medieval French with absolute confidence." Valerian pulled her into his arms, swaying slightly as though to music only he could hear. "I knew then that you were extraordinary. I simply did not know you would become mine. Best decision I ever made, falling in love with you." "Second best," Valerian corrected. "The best decision was choosing transformation, choosing forever. Everything else followed from that." They danced in their private chambers, no music needed, simply moving together in perfect harmony. Outside, the vampire court continued its eternal existence. But here, in this moment, there was only them, two souls who had found each other across impossible odds, who had chosen to build a life together despite every obstacle. "What do you think the next 100 years will bring?" Juliana asked. Valerian considered the question seriously. "Challenges, certainly. The world changes constantly, and we must change with it. But also joy, discovery, continued growth. And through it all, we will have each other. Always, always, forever. For as long as stars burn and the world turns. You are mine, Juliana Drakos, and I am yours. Nothing will ever change that." Juliana kissed him, pouring a half-century of love and devotion into the contact. When they broke apart, both smiling, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not as a human, not as a vampire, but as Valerian's mate, his partner, his equal. They would face the centuries together, would overcome whatever obstacles arose, would build a legacy that would outlast empires, and they would do it all wrapped in the love they'd fought for, chosen deliberately, and nurtured carefully through the years. The future stretched before them, infinite and full of possibility. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Forever had only just begun. Juliana looked up at Valerian, at the vampire king who had defended her honor before his entire court, who had torn apart anyone who threatened her, who had given her eternity because she'd asked for it. She saw her future in his crimson eyes, centuries of love and partnership, challenges overcome and victories celebrated, a bond that death itself could not break. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of forever. "And I love you," Valerian replied, his voice rich with certainty. Until the end of time itself. They stood together on the balcony, overlooking the kingdom they ruled, the life they'd built, the future they would share. Two beings from different worlds who had found in each other something worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living forever for. And in the underground halls of the vampire court, in the darkness that had become home, they began the next chapter of their eternal story together, as they would always be, bound by love and choice and the unbreakable vow of forever, the end.